Welcome to Dominate Your Day podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders who want to make a difference in the workplace. We believe each person is unique and has a purpose they can live out every day and make an impact in the world. Here at Dominate Your Day podcast, we hear stories from leaders who have used their unique talents to transform themselves and their companies from the inside out.
Hi, welcome to Dominate Your Day. I have the privilege of being with Jeff Tun today. Tun, we talked about that a lot. That's an interesting name, Jeff. Where did that come from?
It's from Holland, from the Netherlands.
From the Netherlands. Okay. So Tun like the weight. Easy last name. So welcome to the show. I was intrigued by your bio and what you've been doing in your career, and I want you to share that with our audience. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, Dana. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I love your podcast. I've listened to several episodes in preparing for today, and I like how you mix in storytelling with personal brand and those topics because I think they're so vitally important. My career, I've been in information technology for over 40 years. That sounds hard to believe, but it's true. Over 40 years. Most of that, I'd say the first half of my career, I was in, I call it a practitioner mode. So I wrote software and did those types of things for a wide variety of organizations. And really, about 20, 25 years ago, got drug kicking and screaming into management and leadership. I did not want to do that. I did not want to play the politics. And I had a couple of friends that kind of pulled me along and kicked me in the butt, if you will, to get me into leadership. And what I learned is that I loved it. I found out that helping people grow in their careers and helping them excel gave me a lot of personal satisfaction in watching them grow. And it was similar to writing software. You solve a problem through software. You solve a problem by helping people find the best in themselves. And so I really threw myself into the management and the leadership aspects of it for the second part of my career. Now, I guess you'd say I'm in my third phase in that I left the corporate world about almost 4 years ago now, and have dedicated this part of my career focused on emerging leaders and helping them grow, not specifically in the IT space, in the technology space, but because that's my background, a lot of the work that I do is still with those leaders in technology, but leaders across the board, helping them understand that what we used to call soft skills are really essential skills, and helping them understand those within themselves and identify the ones that they need to depend on and the ones that they need to grow to build. So that's what I've been doing the last several years.
That's great. And you are an author. You've written a couple books, fun books, and you've also been speaking quite a bit. I think you're great. I read a couple of your blogs, a great storyteller. I enjoyed them. So loved sharing that. And I think there's a message here. There's several messages we'll talk throughout, but I think that you never stop growing and building and changing and evolving your personal brand. And as you've talked about, here you were building software and then creating software. Then all of a sudden, I really want to work with people, which I have to tell you, as a coach, sometimes we don't see that many people. And I loved how you talked about the soft
Right,
skills,
right, right.
are the main skills. And I think the essential skills. And I think that those things are not learned, right? Um, they're it's not like you just have them one day. They're acquired. So tell me a story about somebody that you've been leading or guiding in whether it was in your career before starting your own business or when you were a leader, and how you helped them get to be their best with their soft skills.
Oh, that is such a great question. There's so many stories from people I've led in corporate jobs, or people that I have coached. Um, through this phase of my career. I tell you, the one that stands out to me is the people, especially in technology related fields, whether it's IT or whether it's some other technical discipline, making that pivot from being an individual contributor to being a leader, not necessarily in management, because as you know, leadership and management are two different things. And but having them realize what they bring to the table and being able to open them up. So I was working with one individual several years ago that was on my team, and they were fabulous at doing those technical jobs that are required of IT professionals. And they were stereotypical introverted, and what really helped, and the way we were able to break through for them is for me to share a little bit about my own story of being an introvert myself, and how I was able to over the years understand more about what it meant to be introverted. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't like people, that you don't want to talk to people. It's where do you get your energy from and how do you charge? And so we mapped out their day into here's when you're going to interact with people, and here's time to let's carve out some time for you to go be by yourself and recharge. Because that's kind of the way I built my day, and I still do my day that way. We'll do this podcast today, and this afternoon I've got time for just quiet because I need to re-energize. And so helping him understand that it's two different things. The overcoming your shyness and being an introvert are okay. You just have to understand the skill set. And one of the things that I worked with him on is how does an introvert manage themselves in a meeting, right? Because an introvert wants to sit back and watch things and listen, because a lot of times we process things differently. We don't process out loud like some people will talk just to process. And so we talked about things like leaning forward, just your posture shows more engagement. Um, Asking questions, even if you know the answer, asking questions, repeating what someone else has said. Again, it shows your engagement, it shows you're being a part of that. You're still able to do your processing kind of offline, if you will. But just those small little nuances of showing more engagement in a meeting helps your career. And in my own career, I've had to deal with that, right? It's some of the feedback I received from bosses early on is, oh, you're too quiet in meetings. You need to speak up more. Well, I'm still thinking, I'm still processing. So I learned those tricks from others of how to show engagement, but still take my processing time for my ideation.
I love that. Now, so do you know your Clifton Strengths? Have you done the Strengths Finder before?
I have, and in fact, I was looking on my bookshelf earlier for my copy of the book. I don't remember what they were now. It's been long ago enough since I did that I don't recall.
That's okay. I heard some things though that I think that you probably have a lot of thinking talents, and you said ideation, so there's one of the strategic thinking talents. I think those are always, and you mentioned the word energy, and we talk a lot about how when we use our strengths every day, it brings us energy. But most importantly, what I loved you shared in that story, introverts get left behind a lot. And I love the fact that you talk about you being an introvert and how you manage yourself and being able to give one of your teammates some ideas about how to plan their day and based on their energy. And it is overwhelming if you do not, if you're an introvert, to try to be around a lot of people, even just do a podcast or and so it's finding what are those talents. So I love that you helped him put that in blocks of time. So how did you, I see that you also talk about how to network as an introvert. So while we're on talking about introverts, We have, and I interviewed another gal, about 6 months ago, who's an introvert, and she talks about how to help introverts show up in the room and how to what is your advice for helping them network? If they're an introvert and they're trying to network, what is your advice for that?
Oh, that is one of the hardest things to do, and still today. I mean, I've been an avid networker for over 20 years, and I still to walk into a room like at a conference when everybody's mingling and doing the small talk is incredibly difficult. So I offer them several suggestions. One is look for another wallflower. Look for the person that's staring at their phone, and just walk up to them and start a conversation like, oh, this is really uncomfortable, right? You make a joke about it. I advise them not to walk up to a pair of people that are talking because that is a hard group to break into. They're engaged in a conversation. Use the drink line as a way to break into conversation. Right. My wife is one of those amazing people. She can go to the women's room and come back with 27 new best
Yeah,
friends.
she's probably got woo, right? She's like winning others over all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. But if you're in the line for food or drink, just ask the people next to you, "Why'd you come today? What are you here for?" Or if the speaker, if you've just finished listening to a speaker, ask them what they thought about the speaker. Just really non-threatening type things. And so there's lots of different tips and tricks that you can build into your day. The other thing that I recommend people do, set themselves a goal. When you're going to a networking event, set yourself a goal of, I want to come away with the names of 3 people I don't know. And if you're a goal oriented person, that will help you drive towards that, right? I've got a good friend of mine that when she goes to an event, she sets the goal of, I want to talk to 3 people on a deep enough level that I can recommend them a book. Now that's a pretty deep conversation when you really think about it. I don't go that far. I go with the, hey, I just want their LinkedIn connection, right? To do, but setting that goal helps you overcome some of that anxiety. And again, my favorite one is look for the wallflower. Look for somebody else that's struggling to meet people too.
Yeah. And I know there's people out there, you and I both probably know them, as you mentioned your wife, but people that get their energy from meeting new people. And that's also a good person to find because they're going to connect you with new people, but you need to have that other person that's the same kind of bandwidth as you. So you're not just getting drained, right? Because the energy is draining.
One of the hardest things to do is if you go to a networking event with a group of friends or coworkers, is you got to separate yourself from them, because otherwise you'll just spend all the evening talking with them rather than talking with new people. So you've got to be intentional about breaking away from the group you came with.
I think those are great, great advice. Great advice. And I love the drink line. Somebody told me that once. Just go stand right near the drink line and you'll just start meeting people because they come
Yeah.
off of getting their drink and they're kind of like, what do I do with myself? Who can I talk to? So I think that's a great one. So I want to talk to you about IT and the future of work. And as a professional who's been in IT for a while, you mentioned 40 years, and now we're in this whole AI arena, and there's so much coming out every day. Somebody said it's just equated to when the internet came out, kind of. It's so different. What is your take on all this?
I think that's exactly right. I think the explosion of AI this year with generative AI, ChatGPT and Bard and others, I think it's going to fundamentally change the way we work. It will change most everybody's job. It's already starting to have an impact on people's jobs as you begin to understand how you can use it and what it can do. Um, when I look at um, a technology professional who writes software, given that that was my background. When you've got a tool that can write 80% of a software program and you only need to do the 20%, that fundamentally changes the way that you work. You let it build the baseline, and it's not perfect. You still have to correct it. You still have to go in, but it gives you that jump start. As a content creator myself, I write, I blog, I do a podcast myself. I use it to jumpstart ideas. I'll go in and ask. I actually I actually interviewed ChatGPT on my podcast, and ChatGPT is text based, so that people could hear the responses. I took the answer and fed it through a text to speech generator, uh, and used the voice of Snoop Dogg. So ChatGPT has a voice of Snoop Dogg. But I think what's going to happen is uh, it, it's going to further automate a lot of the tasks. We've talked about robotics for years, and the automation of the manufacturing shop floor and some of those types of jobs. And white collar jobs really haven't seen that impact of real true automation. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. And the big fear is that, oh, it's going to put a lot of people out of work, and I don't believe that that's going to happen. I think we're going to reskill over time, and we're going to have to learn how to work with AI as an assistive technology, because we still are the creative, right? Even when you think about these tools like generative AI, they're not coming up with new ideas. They're repackaging old ideas. They've been trained on data models, huge data models, but they've been trained on those models, and they've been trained on how to maybe infer some things from those models, but they're not creating, truly coming up with new ideas. And so I think we're going to learn. You'll start to see very soon. In fact, I've already started to see this pop up a little bit, but you're going to have experts in how to prompt generative AI to give you the answers that you're looking. Because depending on how you ask it, you might get different answers. And so I think those types of things will start to happen. We're already starting to see some of them. I think more specializations out of the human side of things, because we're gonna leverage our talents for the deep knowledge, the deep understanding of how our businesses operate, the more general knowledge and the task driven. That'll be AI. AI will do that. So I think I'm excited about the future, and what this brings. It does come with some cautions. Like any technology, you can use it for nefarious means, and we're starting to see some of that. The one of the big things in cybersecurity are phishing emails, where you get this email about, hey, we need you to click on this link, and those are now being generated by AI, and they become very, very good, because they can find out information about Jeff Tunn from LinkedIn and Google and all that. So they can bring that information into this email that they're sending to me. So we have to get sharper at identifying those things. But I think the power, and its ability to change the way we work has already begun to impact different professions.
So, what is your advice now if you were chief information officer for organization and things are changing all the time and you're trying to bring in AI, you're trying to bring your people along with this? What would be your recommendation to that chief information officer as they begin to bring in AI into their workplace?
Well, I'd say the number one recommendation is don't put your head in the sand. This is not going away. This is not a fad. You've got to learn about it. You've got to understand it. Do you have to know about it in a detailed level? No, but you need to have people around you that know it at a more detailed level. But you need to understand, where to put the guardrails around it. There's things that you can do with these tools to prevent them from learning from your corporate data. There's guidelines that you can put in place that, hey, we don't share personal information with these models. You can ask it questions, but don't give it this type of information. So I think you really have to start with governance. It's like a lot of technology. How you use it within your organization is going to be paramount. So understand where it can bring power to your organization, where it makes sense to use it, and how you can protect the corporate assets and the corporate data. Um, Leveraging its APIs rather than the public interface gives you the ability to segregate your data from the massive data. We saw just in the last 24, 48 hours, the New York Times has come out and said that you cannot use their their publishing to train AI models without their permission. So they've come out and said that. How they're able to block that is a different story altogether. But at least they have said this is our policy. You cannot do that. So I think for the CIO, you have to dig in and understand what the technology is, what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are, and you have to continue to communicate that with your organization. These models are not always right. Uh, they make things up. You mentioned earlier that I've written a couple of books. So one of the books I wrote was about a job search. So I asked ChatGPT, what are the top 10 job search books uh, that are out there, and it listed them, and it didn't list mine. So I was offended that it didn't list mine. So I asked it, well, what about Amplify Your Job Search? And it said, oh yes, Amplify Your Job Search is a great book written by Mary Ellis.
A whole nother name.
Yeah, it's like no, Mary Ellis didn't write that. Jeff Tunn did. So I corrected it and told it, no, that's not correct. And it says, oh, you're right. I went out and looked and blah blah blah. So it does make mistakes, and you have to, as you're experimenting with. I would recommend experimenting in a domain that you're very familiar with, so that you know when things are not quite right.
Yeah, it seems like I've used Chat GPT and I've also used Claude. Are you familiar with? And it's interesting. Claude seems to have more of a personality. And it's funny. I'm like, wow. And that's really important. I think, as you mentioned, creating content, because I'm creating content all the time, but I want it in my voice. And it's funny because I'll ask them both the same question and I'll get different answers. And I have to keep fact checking and fact checking. And I think that's such a good point of starting in a domain that you're familiar with. So you can definitely see that. And do you foresee that we're going to continue to get these different uh, names of robots that we can use like that for content creation, or what are you seeing in that area?
I think so. I think we'll continue to see the growth in this market. It's like any new technology. You get a lot of players at the beginning, and then we'll see some market consolidation. There's some true leaders out there right now. Uh, OpenAI with ChatGPT and uh, Google with theirs, and so you end up with some leaders. But I think the other thing that we're starting to see are specific applications. So one that I use for my podcast, I use this tool called Cast Magic, and Cast Magic will listen to your podcast recording and then will generate some marketing collateral based on that recording. And so again, it's not prime time ready, right? You have to go in and edit it, but it gives you sample LinkedIn posts. It gives you a sample blog post. It goes through and highlights important clips that your guest says within that. And the back end of that is all one of these generative AI language models that's doing that. But it saves 4 or 5 hours an episode of work that you and I would be doing as hosts of a podcast, right? And so the back end are these. I think the back end on Cast Magic is actually Chat GPT, but they've front ended it with here's some tools for a podcast host. So I think you'll start to see more and more of these specialized use cases for the back end of these generative models, whether it's marketing, whether it's Copilot, which is a tool that helps you write software. Those types of things will be just continue to explode over the next several years.
So how do you stay up on all this stuff? I mean, it's just overwhelming, right? Even as a chief information officer or, just this was your space. This was your space. And so how do you stay up on how does one not get overwhelmed, but just know, okay, this is where I feel safe. That's not somebody like you that
It's incredibly hard to do. That we talk about, especially in technology space, that technology, the power of technology, uh, doubles every 2 years or whatever the Moore's law was, and this exponential growth, you can't keep up with it all. It's just not possible. You have to carve out. You have to. My opinion is you have to have a deep understanding of your organization and the vision for your organization, and then you identify the technologies that can help build that vision. And so it may not be all of AI. AI by itself is an incredibly broad topic. So maybe you narrow it down to generative AI or conversational AI or analytical AI. And so these are the pieces that you're going to focus on and keep abreast on. So you listen to podcasts, you subscribe to newsletters that have these topics, and do your best to keep up on those narrow things. But the other thing that I recommend, and this kind of goes back to our networking conversation, is talk to other professionals about what they're seeing and what they're thinking, whether they're in your industry or not. Maybe it's an adjacent industry, uh, because you'll get an idea of, oh, they're using this. I know your background was from the airline industry. They're using this in the airline industry. Maybe I can use this in the retail industry because the processes aren't the same, but there's some nuances that I could leverage. So you do it through conversation, you do it through your own research, but you got to narrow your scope.
it's just too much. Well, and I think for leaders today, we know from Gallup, the latest figures is 1 in 2 people are thinking about quitting their jobs. So we've been talking about the introvert, we've been talking about IT. Now I want to talk about the individual and what it's like to be in corporate right now, manage burnout, manage tons of changes, and help prepare themselves and their personal brand for what's next. And you talk about that in your book, and you talk about that in your so tell what is your advice to people that are wanting to transition.
Oh, that's a fabulous question. So when I think about um, distraction and burnout, one of the things we haven't touched on that I'm involved in is I lead a leadership development program based on the story of Lewis and Clark. So it's basically how do you lead into the future by looking at the past. And one of the things we talk about in there is the importance from a leadership perspective or an individual contributor perspective, this concept of rest, realignment, and reorientation. When you're faced with burnout, when you're faced with distraction, you have to rest. You have to take a pause, even if it might be a short pause, it might be a vacation, it might be uh, a sabbatical if you're able to take a longer term thing. You need that rest, and then you need to take a look at the vision. What are you trying to achieve? And do you need to realign yourself back with that vision? Or do you need a whole new reorientation? Maybe the vision no longer holds today. Maybe it's the vision for your career as we're talking about career transitions. If you've done the rest, if you've done the realignment, and you're still not feeling engaged, you're still not there, you may need to reorient your internal compass and look for something new. And the way I talk about it in my book, Amplify Your Job Search, is very similar, Dana, to the way you talk about it. Is it starts with you. You have to understand your personal brand, right? And for me, I define personal brand as your strengths, your values, your passions, and your purpose. And if you develop a true understanding of what those are for you, then you start to map that to what it is you want to do in your vocation. And because what we're all trying to find out of our career is a job that leverages our strengths, aligns with our values, feeds our passion, and helps us towards our purpose. Those are the four things we're looking for. And if you can find those in a job, then you're going to be more engaged. And that's that reorientation is you have to and step back and say, has my has my passion changed? I was passionate about this work 15 years ago or 5 years ago or a year ago. Has that changed? Has my purpose changed? Because your purpose will change throughout life. What my purpose is today is not the same purpose I had when I was 25 years old. It's changed. It doesn't mean either one is better than the other. It's just different. And so, trying to align what I'm doing today with my 25-year-old self would not work. I'd be a long hair hippie guitar player if that was the case, and I'm not. I think that's that reorientation that we have to go through uh, when we're struggling at work. And the answer may be you're happy right where you are, but I think you have to go through that process of what are your uh, what are your strengths. So I love strengths finders as a way to do that. I want to talk just a second about weaknesses also. But what are your strengths? What are your values? What's your passions? And what's your purpose? So weaknesses. I always counsel people that the big quote from I think it was Peter Drucker, and everybody misquotes Drucker when they say maximize your strengths and make your weaknesses irrelevant, because that's not what he said. He said you have to have a deep understanding of your strengths and your weaknesses. So I think we also have to look at our weaknesses and identify and look at them with this critical eye of, hey, this I identify as a weakness, but if I work on it just a little bit, I'm going to get huge gains in my career. Uh, a story from my own career. If you'd asked me strengths and weaknesses 20, 25 years ago, I would have put public speaking as a huge weakness. I hated it. Talk about being an introvert and you make me get up in front of 1,000 people and talk. No way is that going to happen, right? But I knew to be able to accomplish the things that I needed to do in my career, uh, I was going to have to figure out a way to get over that. So I specifically and intentionally put myself in situations that required me to talk to groups of people. And I'm not suggesting that by focusing on a weakness, you're going to turn it into a new career path, but just the ability to take it from a real weakness to maybe some of the middle of the road type skills that you have will make a huge difference in your career.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff, because I bet when I see your strengths, I bet you've got something in your strengths that gets energy from being with people in a group. Not your not the part that we're talking about that's the introvert part, but the part that the influencing part. And so it could be that that's coming up for you. I think one of the things we talk about a lot is that we're not to be well rounded. we are to be well-rounded as a team.
Well, and that's such great insight because the way I describe what happened in my transformation, if you will, is I was able to learn how to take that nervous energy of getting it up in front of people and use it as emotional energy when I'm in front of people, right? So I was able to tap into that, but it's a learned skill. It's something that I had to work on to be able to do that. So that's very insightful, Dana.
Yeah, it's like you found you'd been working in coding all this time and IT, and then all of a sudden you found you loved working with people. Well, there's a human piece of your strengths there that's drawing you to be with humans and to be and to so it's kind of exciting to watch that and see that and talk about it because I think you're giving us sound bites for IT, but you're also putting it in a humanistic form and saying, this is way it is. So as we've talked about introverts, as we've talked about IT, and now we've talked about the individual, is there anything that is coming up for you as we get ready to close out on your mind that maybe you didn't get to share today that's just coming up as we talk about those three areas and your personal brand?
Well, I touched on this a little bit. One of the things that I have fallen in love with over the years is studying leaders from history. I mentioned Lewis and Clark. Um, there are so many lessons that we can learn from studying people in the past and how they encountered things. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. Um, and I would encourage people to take a look at some historical figures and try to identify, just as a fun exercise, try to identify a leadership trait that they had that made them maybe a little bit different than those around them. I've studied Theodore Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King and Dwight D. Eisenhower, and they all had some tangible leadership quality that we can learn from today. So I'd encourage people to look to the past to be able to lead to the future.
Oh, there's your context. I hear that. So tell me, who's your favorite person from the past? The favorite historian?
Well, it absolutely has to be the story of Lewis and Clark. What they were able to accomplish was an incredible feat. And my wife and I have traveled the entire Lewis and Clark Trail from Monticello, Virginia, from Monticello, Virginia to Astoria, Oregon, and back to St. Louis over about a 4 or 5 year period. And the leadership lessons from their story, I think, are so vital today. The way that they made decisions and different situations, they made decisions different. There are times when they used the stroke of the pen and just said, this is what we're going to do. There are other times that they did it based on consensus. There's another time when they did it based on a vote. Just different situations, and how do you make these decisions? And I just think it's a fascinating study. So they are my heroes. I know on an audio podcast you can't see the painting behind me, but the painting behind me is of Meriwether Lewis crossing over the Continental Divide and seeing the Rocky Mountains for the first time, and realizing at that moment that there was not a Northwest Passage. And in fact, they were faced with mountain range after mountain range after mountain range. And how do you keep going? How do you proceed on in the face of that almost insurmountable mountain in front of you?
What an inspiring story. I mean, I remember reading their story years ago and thinking, oh, that would be cool to go. And you actually did it. You're the only person I know that's gotten to do it. So that's exciting. And I do love learning from history. I think it's so powerful. And that's where we're creating history right now in everybody and what they're doing. And so looking at life that way, I love that approach. So Jeff, as we close out, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you if they want to reach out to you, follow your podcast, read your books, all that?
I'm on LinkedIn. I love the LinkedIn platform, so reach out to me there. I'm really easy to find. There's not a lot of Jeff Tons out there, so you can find me pretty easily. Um, so that's probably the easiest way. My website is jeffreystun.com, and you can find me there. My podcast. Thank you for allowing me to mention my podcast. I host a weekly podcast called Status Go. It's for technology professionals who want to break out of the status quo and drive change in their organization. So, for your listeners that are in technology, you might find that interesting. Add it to your subscribe list after you subscribe to Dana's,
Yes.
and listen to them both.
Great. I love the name Status Go. I love that. That's great. Very creative. Well, Jeff, thank you for being here today. I think we got a lot of insight, and I'm excited to share you with our listeners and hopefully continue the conversation in the future.
Absolutely. And Dana, thank you very much for having me on the program. I appreciate it.
You have been listening to Dominate Your Day podcast. If you're ready to transform your life and workplace from the inside out, go to danawilliamsco.com and set up a discovery call. We would love to connect with you and equip you with some helpful resources. Thank you for listening today, and please take a moment to subscribe to Dominate Your Day wherever you listen.